They called me a failure who couldn't make it in the real world, but that day when General Morrison walked into our family dinner and said, "Respect the founder," everything changed. The autumn rain drummed against the dining room windows as my mother set another place at the table. My siblings exchanged those familiar glances. The ones that said, "Here comes another lecture about my wasted potential." Before I share what happened next, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. These stories travel further than I ever imagined. Still living in that tiny apartment downtown, my brother Marcus asked, cutting his steak with theatrical precision. Sarah, my younger sister, laughed that sharp laugh she'd perfected since high school. At least he's not asking Dad for money anymore. The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I had been struggling. After 8 years in the army, civilian life felt like speaking a foreign language. What they didn't know was why I kept those late-night phone calls brief. Why I drove that beat-up Honda instead of something newer. Why I dressed in simple clothes and lived modestly. They saw failure where something else entirely was growing. "Remember when you said you'd make something of yourself?" Sarah continued, serving herself more wine. "That was what, 3 years ago?" Mom tried to intervene with talk about the weather, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Some of us actually built careers, jobs with benefits, retirement plans." I nodded quietly, the way I always did. The way I'd learned to do. My phone buzzed against my leg. Another message I couldn't answer. Not here. Not now. The sender's name would have meant nothing to them anyway. Defense contracts weren't dinner conversation in our house. "You could still go back to school," Dad offered gently. He meant well. They all did, in their way. Community college has that veterans program. I smiled and thanked him, knowing I already held degrees they'd never heard about. Degrees earned while building something they couldn't imagine. The doorbell rang through their familiar chorus of disappointment. Mom looked confused. "We're not expecting anyone." Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of the black sedan in our driveway. Military plates. My stomach dropped. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not tonight. "I'll get it," I offered, standing quickly. But Dad was already at the door, his voice carrying back to us with surprise and something approaching awe. "Well, I'll be damned. General Morrison." The dining room fell silent. Even Sarah's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. General Morrison stepped into our modest dining room wearing his dress blues, for stars gleaming on his shoulders. His presence filled our small dining room like electricity before a storm. "Sir," I said automatically, the military bearing returning to my spine without conscious thought. My family stared in confusion as I straightened, shoulders back, chin level. They'd never seen me stand like that before. "At ease, son," General Morrison said, but his eyes held something I hadn't expected. Recognition mixed with what looked like surprise. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. His gaze swept the room, taking in my family's bewildered faces. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Mom recovered first, as mothers do. "Not at all, General. Please, join us for dinner." She was already pulling out the chair beside mine, the good china appearing as if by magic. My siblings remained frozen, probably wondering how their failure of a brother knew a 4-star general. "Thank you, ma'am, but I can't stay long." He settled into the chair anyway, his ribbons catching the light. "I was just telling my aide about the remarkable work being done by veterans in the private sector these days." His eyes found mine again. "Some of the most innovative defense solutions are coming from people who understand the real needs in the field." Sarah cleared her throat. "How do you know our brother, General?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel everyone's attention focus on me, waiting for an explanation I couldn't give. "Not yet. Not like this. We've crossed paths professionally," he said carefully. Too carefully. My father leaned forward, interested now in a way he hadn't been in years. "What kind of professional work?" The question I'd been dreading. 3 years ago, I'd walked out of the army with nothing but a duffel bag and an idea. The idea had come during my second deployment, watching good soldiers work with equipment that should have been better. Gear that failed when it mattered most. Communication systems that went dark at the worst possible moments. I'd spent my savings, every penny of my military pay, on a workshop in an industrial district downtown. Those first months, I lived on ramen and coffee, sketching designs by lamplight, teaching myself engineering principles I'd never learned in formal classes. My family thought I was lost, drifting, unable to adjust to civilian life. They weren't entirely wrong. I was adjusting, just not in the way they expected. While Marcus climbed corporate ladders and Sarah built her marketing career, I was building something else. Something that started with one small contract to improve radio encryption for forward operating bases. The defense industry is changing, General Morrison continued, accepting the glass of water Mom offered. The best innovations aren't coming from the big corporations anymore. They're coming from small companies, veteran-owned businesses that understand what troops actually need. My phone buzzed again. This time I glanced at it. The message was from Colonel Williams at the Pentagon. The prototype testing results were in. Positive. Better than positive. Revolutionary, according to the engineers who'd run the trials. Our brother isn't in the defense industry, Marcus said with that familiar, condescending tone. He works odd jobs, lives paycheck to paycheck. The words hit me like they always did, even though I knew better now. Even though my company's revenue last quarter had exceeded his annual salary. General Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly. Is that so? He looked at me with something that might have been amusement. Sometimes the most important work happens quietly, behind the scenes. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines but saves lives. Dad was studying me now with new interest. Son, what exactly have you been doing these past 3 years? The question I'd been avoiding, the conversation I'd postponed too many times. How do you explain that the failure they pitted had built something extraordinary? I've been consulting, I said finally. It wasn't a lie, just an incomplete truth. Working with military contractors on equipment improvements. The understatement of the century, but it was a start. Consulting, Sarah repeated, as if the word tasted strange. What kind of consulting? Before I could answer, General Morrison's phone rang. He glanced at it, then at me, then back at the phone. Excuse me, he said, standing. I need to take this. He stepped toward the window, but I caught fragments of his conversation. Words like successful demonstration and full production approval and the founder will be pleased. When he returned to the table, something had changed in his expression. He looked at me differently now, as if seeing me clearly for the first time tonight. That was the Pentagon, he said, settling back into his chair. They've just approved full production of the new tactical communication system. He paused, his gaze finding mine across the table. The one that's going to save countless lives in the field. My heart stopped. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not here, not now, not in front of my family who still saw me as their biggest disappointment. But General Morrison continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority that comes with 4 stars. The system was developed by a small company right here in the city. Veteran-owned, innovative, absolutely brilliant work. He turned to face my parents directly. Your son's company. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's fork clattered against his plate. Sarah's wine glass remained suspended halfway to her lips, forgotten. Dad's eyes moved between the general and me, searching for understanding. I'm sorry, Mom said slowly, but there must be some mistake. Our son doesn't own a company. Her voice carried that patient tone she used when correcting misunderstandings. He works odd jobs, lives in a small apartment. General Morrison smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something others don't. Ma'am, your son founded Tactical Solutions 3 years ago. His company just received a $50 million contract to equip every forward operating base in our overseas operations. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 50 million, Sarah whispered, finally setting down her wine glass. Dollars. That's just the initial contract, General Morrison continued. The full implementation over 5 years will exceed 200 million. He looked at me with something approaching pride. Your son has revolutionized battlefield communications. His encryption protocols are years ahead of anything we've seen. Marcus found his voice first. But he drives that old Honda. Lives in that tiny apartment. The words came out confused, almost pleading. As if the general might take back what he'd said if presented with enough evidence of my failure. Smart business practices, General Morrison replied. Keep overhead low, reinvest profits into research and development. Classic veteran mindset. Focus on the mission, not the flash. He stood, straightening his uniform. I should mention, your son turned down 3 acquisition offers last year. Companies wanted to buy him out for more money than most people see in a lifetime. Dad was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Is this true? The question came out rough, uncertain. You own a defense contracting company? I nodded slowly. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. The truth was more complicated. How do you explain that you stayed quiet because their doubt had become familiar? That their low expectations had become a comfortable place to hide? The encryption system your son developed, General Morrison continued, prevented a major security breach just last month. Intelligence analysts estimate it saved hundreds of American lives. He extended his hand to me. On behalf of the United States military, thank you for your service. Both in uniform and out. I stood and shook his hand, feeling my family's eyes on us both. Just doing my job, sir. No, he said firmly. You're doing exceptional work. The kind of work that wins wars and brings soldiers home safely. He turned back to my family. You should be incredibly proud. Your son is making a difference on a scale most people can't imagine. After General Morrison left, the dining room felt different. Smaller somehow, but also charged with new possibility. My family sat in stunned silence, processing everything they'd learned. The failure they'd pitted for 3 years was actually more successful than any of them. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked finally, her voice soft with hurt and confusion. Because I needed you to love me without it, I said simply. I needed to know that your disappointment wasn't really about money or success. I needed to build something for the right reasons. Sarah was crying quietly, her mascara smudging. We're so sorry. We had no idea. You weren't supposed to, I replied, reaching across to squeeze her hand. But now you do. Dad cleared his throat, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Son, I owe you an apology. We all do. No apologies needed, I said, meaning it. You raised me to serve something bigger than myself. I'm just glad I found a way to keep serving. The rain had stopped outside. Through the window, I could see stars beginning to appear between the clouds. Tomorrow, everything would be different. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. As we sat together in the quiet aftermath of truth, I realized something important. The validation I'd been seeking wasn't in their recognition of my success. It was in their love, which had been there all along, hidden beneath their worry and disappointment. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't about proving others wrong. Sometimes they're about finally allowing yourself to be seen for who you really are. If this story touched you, think about the people in your life who might be fighting battles you can't see. Sometimes the quiet ones are changing the world in ways we never notice. Until the moment we finally do.